That was on purpose because where they have a goal, and that's to keep each other sober, we in the space over here at Manned Spacecraft Center and in the space program in general also had a goal: keep the crew safe. Everything we did was associated, we looked at through the lens of crew safety. Everything. Vehicle design, vehicle operations, spacesuit design, everything was looked at with an eye towards crew safety. Let me point out one example. That right there is called a launch escape system. What would happen on the launch is if something bad happened down on the first stage in the first 2 minutes of flight, this, which is a rocket, you can see the nozzles right there, would lift the command module here where the astronauts are off of the disabled vehicle, off to the side, let them parachute into the ocean to safety. And you know, that was probably several $1 million even back in the 60s to build that, but it was worth it because it's crew safety. It was even more expensive than that because when you're way in, you walk by that Little Joe 2 rocket. That flew only 5 times, the Little Joe 2 rocket, and the sole purpose of Little Joe 2 rocket was to test that. That's the only reason we built Little Joe 2 and used it, to make sure that would work. So, let me move along to Apollo, and I'll talk about other crew safety things as I go. Hopefully you'll be here for a while, because I got to tell you all about Apollo. Down at the first stage down there, the S1C stage, the big one that you walk by, got 5 engines on it. And those engines would burn liquid oxygen and kerosene. And those are the most powerful, I think, the most powerful liquid fuel rocket engines ever made. We got 5 of them, put out 1.5 million pounds of thrust, each one of them, for a total of 7.5 million pounds of thrust and liftoff. The vehicle on the pad ready to go weighs 6.4 million pounds. So we got about 1 million pounds worth of giddy up to get us underway. That rocket, that stage will burn for a little under 3 minutes and take the vehicle to about 6-7 miles high, 40 miles downrange, and going about 4,000 miles an hour. And it shuts down and falls into the ocean. And no, we don't recover it. They're down there, and if you want to recover it, you're welcome to it. California billionaires have tried. They've found a few pieces, but nobody's brought back a whole one. I doubt there is a whole one because it wasn't built to withstand a crash in the ocean. But they're down there. Second stage lights up. It's got 5 engines on it as well. Those engines burn liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen. Now that's a more powerful propellant per pound than kerosene and oxygen, but not more powerful per cubic foot. Because liquid hydrogen is like the density of styrofoam. It takes a big tank to have the same amount of energy. And we can do that on the second stage. 5 engines, 100,000 pounds of thrust per engine, 200,000 pounds of thrust per engine, for a total of about 1 million pounds in the second stage. It lights up as soon as the stage is off from the first stage and takes the vehicle almost to low Earth orbit, but not quite. And it shuts down and falls through the atmosphere, breaking up, and some pieces probably are in the bottom of the ocean off the coast of Africa. Third stage lights up and it's got 1 engine on it. Same engine as the 5 on the second stage, with 1 optional feature. It can be restarted. We'll use that. It's going to take the start up and get the vehicle into orbit, 150-mile altitude, and they're going to go around the Earth two times around the Earth. And what they're doing on those 2 times around the Earth is making sure all the systems in the command and service module are in good shape after launch. You know, the launches are kind of rough. They kind of shake things up. Those engines vibrate some. So they make sure everything's working and in the lunar module as well before they commit to going to the moon. Because it's a whole lot easier to come home from low Earth orbit than it is from halfway to the moon. So about 1.5 times around the Earth, if everything checks out, capsule communicator in the control center over in Building 30 calls up and says, "Apollo, you're going for TLI." TLI is jargon for translunar injection, which is a maneuver to go to the moon. So at the right time in the orbit, the third stage lights up and fires and takes this much of the vehicle from 17,500 miles an hour to a few hundred miles higher and going 25,000 miles an hour, hell bent for the moon. what happens next is interesting. The astronauts will fly the command and service module up away from this. These panels on the third stage, I'll point them out. That's these panels. You can see a seam right there, and hinges right there, and another hinge up there. And that's these panels opening up to expose the lunar module inside there. Astronauts fly the command module up, turn it around, come back and dock with the lunar module, and lift it out. That happens all within about an hour of this stage shutting down on the way to the moon. This is going to the moon. Let me set it down while I tell you what happens to this. Well, here we got an empty stage. The tank's pretty much empty. It's made of aluminum, which isn't all that valuable stuff. And it got an engine which is spent. It's good for 2 light ups, and it's done its job, so it's not very useful anymore. So on the first few Saturn V flights, it would fly right by the moon and into orbit around the sun. I mean, once you shut it down, this is going towards the moon, so is this. So it goes right by the moon into the orbit around the sun, and they're out there, and they'll be there forever. Every so often I see a report on TV about one's going to be within a few million miles of Earth. Don't worry, you'll never hit the Earth. Later, after we put seismic instrumentation on the surface of the moon, we would crash this into the moon. Give the moon a good hard thump, which would be echoed around the plate tectonics of the moon and be recorded on a seismic instrument that the astronauts had left there, and we learn more about lunar geology by crashing that on the moon. So, here we are, headed for the moon. The trajectory that it's on is something called a free return trajectory. That means that we designed the trajectory such that if you didn't fire any more engines of any size, the lunar gravity would take and turn the vehicle around and bring it right back to Earth without any rocket engine to get them home. And it would be also at an angle that was suitable for re-entry. Later missions, after we got some confidence in these engines, we relaxed that a little bit because that cost us some payload going to the moon. But it was, once again, a crew safety issue when we didn't know what to expect. Anyway, here we are headed for the moon. And we get back on the back side of the moon, fire up this engine right here on the service module. Now this is what we call a hypergolic propellant engine. Now the combination of propellants, that's nitrogen tetroxide and monomethyl hydrazine. Memorize that, I'm going to give you a pop test later. Those two chemicals don't like each other. If you pour a teaspoon of each in a petri dish in your lab, they'll just spontaneously start burning. I mean, they really don't like each other. They're not as powerful per pound as liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen. That makes the engine so much simpler. All they got to do is have 2 valves and 2 tanks and a thrust chamber. And we got an engine that will run. Open the valves and it's running. Fire up this engine on the back side of the moon, and it slows the vehicle down into orbit around the moon. And so now, it's in an orbit 60 miles altitude around the moon. Astronauts get out of the 2 astronauts at the right time will get out of the command module and get into the lunar module. Climb through. There's a hatchway right in this connection area here. They can climb through. What'll happen then is, at the right time, the astronaut will separate. Hey, wait a minute, only 2 people went in there. There's a 3rd astronaut here. What's with him? I mean, he paid his money, bought his ticket to the moon. He's not going to get there? That's right. He's got a very important job to do. And I'll tell you what it is in a few minutes, but for now, let's just talk about what's going to happen with these 2 astronauts. First, they open up their landing gear, and at a point halfway around the moon from their landing site, right there where his hand is, they fire up this engine right here. It's a throttleable hypergolic propellant engine, and it will slow the vehicle down where it passes over the landing site at 11,000 feet. It slows it down, it fires up once to make that pass, then it started up again as they approach that 11,000 foot point. Fire it up again, slows it down. Pretty soon it's just hovering over the surface of the moon while the astronauts fly a little bit like a helicopter, make sure it's not going to land on a boulder or in a hole or something. In other words, find a flat spot. And on the first one, they set it down, and well, you remember, Houston, here the Eagle, Houston, here the Apollo, the Eagle has landed. What the words were. Sometimes I forget about all that. You wouldn't believe how excited we were in the Clear Lake area when it actually happened. We did it. It was a Saturday afternoon, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I always remember that. I was watching it on television in my apartment in Nassau Bay because I didn't have mission responsibility. So they're down. First thing they do, make sure that the vehicle's ready to lift off at a moment's notice, just in case they have to abort and get on back. Then they can put on their spacesuits and climb down the ladder on the landing gear. And on the way down, there's a plaque on one of the landing gear that says, "We came in peace for all mankind." Apollo, the names of the astronauts and the dates. And I think dates. Why did we put that there? Because if you come from the moon of Jupiter, would you know our calendar? Here we go. I'm gonna laugh. That's my attempt at humor. After that, they go out, plant a flag. You've seen that picture, the flag. It's probably still there. It's certainly still there. Probably bleached white from the sunlight over 50 years, but it's still there. And they take pictures, of course. Hi, Mom, look at me. And then they go about their business on the moon. They'll get bags and they'll go around. They take a staff with them, about this long, with a basket on the end, walk along and say, "There's a rock that I think the geologists are interested in." Take a picture of it first before they mess it up, and scoop it up and put it in a Ziploc, put it in their bag. We didn't know we had Ziplocs back then, did we? Anyone may call it bad, but anyway, there they are walking around looking for rocks. They made two forays outside of the lunar module on the first flight, and the first flight was on the surface of the moon about 22 hours. After which, the astronauts, later missions, they would stay there as much as 3 or 4 days, sleeping in between or whatever. And they even took a little vehicle with them, a lunar rover, a great diorama over in Space Center Houston. They take this rover out of the descent stage, unfold the wheels, and drive around on the moon. Never so far they couldn't walk back to the lunar module if they had to, if it died. But they did that, drove around, and found more of that particular landing site. And then they came back, parked that rover off to the side, pointed its camera towards the limb, so we could see a launch. It was pretty impressive. I don't know if you've ever seen those films, but it was pretty neat to actually see the launch in real time. Right time, relative to this other astronaut, if launch, the ascent stage. Now the descent stage, it's on the moon and will be there forever. Unless somebody really wants to be a souvenir hunter and go get it. It's up, flies, and its purpose is to fly up and rendezvous with its third astronaut up here. But I want to ask you, what happens if it can't finish the rendezvous? Do we just leave these guys in orbit somewhere around the moon for the rest of their lives? Yeah, I don't think they'd like that. So that's why we got a third astronaut we took to the moon and had him not land, all in the name of crew safety. He can fly the command and service module down to wherever they are as long as they're in a safe orbit, dock, and rescued. That's why we took a third astronaut to the moon, crew safety. Okay, move the bag of rocks and film canisters. You do know what film is, don't you? into the command module and separate off the ascent stage. It's pretty much useless. It did its job. I saw in a press release or some guy was saying he thinks it's still in orbit around the moon. I say bullshit. There's too much Earth gravity and moon and solar gravity, but what it crashed into the moon sometime in the last 50 years. I can guarantee it. Okay, right time. This engine here fires up. This hypergolic. What is that? I told you pop test. Give you a pop test. What does that mean? Hypergolics.
Hydrogen peroxide.
Now you're trying good. Nitrogen tetroxide and monomethyl hydrazine. Okay, fire it up and head for moon. Head for back to Earth. Now, while they're going back to Earth, I'm going to stop stop the narrative of the mission and talk about something else that's really important to me and to you as well. That's STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and that's what you do with STEM. Let me point out examples. In the way of science, well, I had to fly through the atmosphere. We had to know about the atmosphere and how its density and how it affects drag on the vehicle, so you know how much propellant put in the tanks. In the way of gravity, gravity is a science as well. We had to know gravity in order to calculate orbits. And that would be gravity of the Earth and gravity of the Moon, and even know about the gravity of the Sun affecting how the orbits around the Earth and Moon were affected by that. And we did that. So those are science. The way of technology, well, the whole thing is technological, but I like to point out one thing, and that's that those tanks down there, those big, all three of those tanks in the Saturn V have really cold liquids in them, like as much as minus 450 degrees Fahrenheit. And your garden variety aluminum really doesn't do well at that temperature. So they had to come up with the right alloy of aluminum to build the tanks and the right amount of insulation put around them to keep the tanks properly insulated. And that's a technology of metallurgy. The way of engineering, well, this whole thing's engineered, but I like to point out those big rocket engines you walk by on the way in. Isn't that a beautiful, graceful bell shape to them? I think it's a beautiful shape. Well, it's not just a beautiful shape some draftsman slapped on a piece of paper and said, that looks good. A rocket engineer would model gases expanding in the thrust chamber and shape that nozzle such that it maximizes the amount of push up it gets out of expanding gases as the gases go down. That's rocket engineering. And that brings us to mathematics. So, how's your math doing, young man? Not so sure, huh?
Got to do it.
How's your math?
No good.
No good. Work on it. How about you?
No.
Your math okay?
Yes.
That's what I like to hear. Somebody saying yes. You can't do it. You can't be a rocket scientist without having a lot of mathematics. I'm here to tell you, it's endemic in our profession. If you want to be any sort of an engineer, in fact, you need mathematics. Civil engineers use math all the time to analyze beams when they're building bridges and stuff like that. Mathematics. How about doctors? Doctors take chemistry, and there's a lot of math in chemistry. And mathematics is everywhere. How about it? So you want to be an economist or an accountant or something like that. There's a lot of that's mostly adding and subtracting, but that's mathematics. So you got to know your math. Learn your math real well. Got it? Learn your math. Very, very, very important that you get all the math you can. I promise. I'll take contributions from parents. No, but it's true. So here we are, coming back to Earth. 3 astronauts, a bag of rocks, and a bag of film canisters, and headed back to Earth. As they approach the Earth, the command module separates from the service module. This thing, it's pretty much useless by now because it had propellant to get into and out of lunar orbit. It had hydrogen and oxygen to make electricity and to breathe. It's empty. It just burns up in the atmosphere. And this, I'm going to change to a bigger model appointment. This is what comes back with the bag of rocks and the astronauts. This side of it is what we call a heat shield. It comes in blunt side first. It's kind of a material science people came up with a concoction of plastic, phenolic, fiberglassy thin stuff that has the property that in a blowtorch environment, let me tell you, wind hitting it at 25,000 miles an hour, that's blowtorch. Wind hitting it at that, it just chars, turns black, flakes off, but never burns. And so it does that until it's slowed down to parachute level speed. About 100,000 feet, pretty soon it's falling straight down. Parachutes open, 3 parachutes open up. 1 would be enough, but 2 more for redundancy. And SpaceX put 4 on their Dragon capsule. And it hits and splashes down in the ocean. And here comes a helicopter from the aircraft carrier that we landed next to, and the aircraft carrier, the helicopter will drop out some scuba divers who put a flotation collar around this, because this is a valuable museum piece. Now you can see Apollo 17 over in Space Center, Houston. Put a flotation collar around it. Then they had a biological isolation suits to the astronauts, which they put on, white overalls and booties and a mask and cover their head. And the reason for that was back in the 60s, microbiologists were not convinced but what there might be some sort of germs, bacteria, viruses, something on the moon that was living there that the astronauts would bring back, and that would infect the Earth, something to which we have no immunity. So we protected against it. Turned out there wasn't any, but we got protected. They got in that suit, take the helicopter, fly back, and they were put into a biological isolation living quarters for a month.
I have no guarantee. That's unfair. Larry's double right there.
Yeah. You can't reach over because
Oh, but why is that one all fucking shiny? Oh wait, no. People don't go on this. They control it from Earth. And then I think it's crazy how much shit goes back. Yeah, and then it comes back to Earth. That is a parachute.